Each year, the Senate Assembly approves the compensation guidelines for rostered ministers of our Senate. This year, because we did not have a Senate Assembly, the Senate Council took on that role and approved new guidelines for 2021 that are designed to help start a conversation about a fair and just compensation for your rostered ministers. I can't emphasize enough that the point of these guidelines are not simply to dictate this is what you should or should not pay, but to help you to engage in a conversation, looking at all the dynamics of the call, of the partnership, the resources of the congregation, the needs of the rostered ministers, so that you can arrive at a compensation that again is fair and just to both the congregation and to the rostered minister. You will notice in these guidelines there is no chart that we are used to, a chart where we can simply go pull out a number and say this is what we should or should not pay our rostered minister. Rather, there is a worksheet that is designed again to invite you to sit down together and work through things, have the conversation so that you can come together in a mutual agreement. The other piece that I want to emphasize about these guidelines is, along with having a conversation about money, yes, I know it's not something that we're always comfortable with, but it's necessary, even and especially in the church. It is also important for us to have a conversation about expectations, about goals. What has gone well? What has not gone well in the past year? What do we want to focus on, not only as a pastor, but as a congregation? In other words, it's important to have a review of the ministry, both from the pastor's standpoint, how has a pastor or the deacon been doing, but also from the standpoint, where's the congregation going? So as you use these guidelines, which again, I know they're a bit different, and I also recognize that these guidelines were developed. I deeply appreciate all the work the team did before the pandemic hit. And now we are looking at some different financial realities. All of that is true. But to keep in mind that these are guidelines designed to help you have conversations about money, about what is fair and just for the pastor, the deacon, and the congregation, and about how the relationship is going, that review of the pastor and the ministry in the congregation. Feel free to reach out to me, to other staff members, as you navigate through these important conversations, and thank you for willing to have them.
The Central State Senate has historically relied on an appendix to help congregations, pastors, and deacons determine what a fair compensation might be. However, this table didn't really help them weigh all the variables involved, so we've developed a new form to help. Change can be hard for us Lutherans, so we're going to walk through an example congregational completing this form for their pastor. We'll call this congregation Wittenberg Lutheran Church. Their treasurer, George Spallenton,
Hello.
is filling out this form in conversation with their pastor, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther.
Guten Tag. I just want to begin by saying that form looks more complicated than my 95 theses.
Let's just take it a step at a time, and you'll see how easy it is. The first step is to determine an adjusted baseline compensation.
But wouldn't it be different for congregations that provide a parsonage and those that don't?
I can see why that might be confusing, because we're used to begin our calculations by starting with a magically determined base salary and adding on an arbitrary 30% housing. Instead, we've chosen to move forward by looking at what the total package should look like for a worker in the church. We'll adjust this amount later if your congregation offers a parsonage.
So the adjusted baseline would be similar to the minimum a worker would earn in any other vocation, like teachers, waiters, or barbers. I've always said every vocation is important. The priesthood of all the baptized, I call it. By the way, you should meet my barber, Master Pater. He does an excellent job, but the conversations we have are even better.
Yes, that's right. You could compare this to the total salary people in other professions would get.
So why can't I change the baseline myself?
Another good question. The baseline is set each year by the Synod Assembly. We'll make modifications to this amount later in the form to fit your context and your pastor. One of the things you'll notice on this form is that all the blue boxes are either pre-filled or numbers that automatically calculate. You can't change those. All the orange boxes are where you make selections or enter your own numbers.
Got it.
Oh, boring. Let's move on.
Let's. The first choice you have to make is the localized cost of living adjustment in box B. Using the drop-down box, you'll select whether the cost of living in the area of your congregation is above, around, or below the national median.
Definitely above. Have you seen the houses around here? They're all made of stone. One guy even has a castle.
I agree. Homes in Wittenberg are definitely higher than the median 200,000. I looked around on Zillow just to be sure our assumptions were correct.
Good. So this adjusts the baseline to match your local community. Now it's time to move on to step 2, determining additional compensation your pastor should receive.
Okay, so I see here that I should enter the number of years Pastor Luther has spent in ministry. Pastor Luther, when were you ordained?
1507. But it didn't go so well. First, I spilled the blood of Christ while presiding at communion. Then I got into a really bad argument with my father. Then I topped it off by arguing with the devil. And the whole day I had really bad intestinal, issues. So maybe let's not talk about that day, okay?
Okay, Pastor. I'll go ahead and enter 8 in box E.
Perfect. Now move on to non-rostered work experience in box F.
But Pastor Luther always says that we are justified by grace through faith, not according to our work.
Oh, so you pay attention to that, but not what I've written about relics, huh, Spalatin?
Our salvation in Christ might be based on grace, but Pastor Luther has to feed his family. Would you really like to have 16 years of business or teaching experience count for nothing and start out at the bottom of the pay scale as a new pastor if it were you? We honor the fact that our rostered leaders learn and mature even in other vocations, and that counts for something. So we allow for up to 16 years of work in other professions to count, with every 2 years translating to additional 1 year of compensation.
Okay, but I think Pastor Luther came straight from school.
Nicht wahr. Not true. I spent 2 years as a monk before I was ordained. I scrubbed floors and confessed by day and fought the devil by night.
So, do I enter 2 years or half of that?
You just enter the actual years of work experience in box F. The form will divide it for you.
2 it is then. Next is additional education. Pastor Luther has a master's degree and a doctorate, so I choose yes in box H, yeah?
Exactly.
So why does it enter a 3 in amount I?
That's the way the form qualifies the amount of additional compensation a leader deserves for extra education. Next, consider what additional responsibilities and gift your pastor brings. This is where you have the freedom to acknowledge your congregation's high demands on your pastor or the exceptional gifts they bring.
That's tough. He has produced a lot of writing materials and brought a lot of attention to Wittenberg. Oh, and he does write some pretty amazing hymns. I'm going to put a 3 in box J.
That seems fair.
I see the form adds up all the numbers, but how does it determine the total additional value? Is it just a certain number multiplied by the points?
Not exactly. We've weighed the scale so the points add up more quickly on the lower end and less quickly on the higher end. Rostered leaders will gain value from education and experience at any age, but we acknowledge that they learn and gain experience much more quickly at the beginning of their ministry. 5 years of experience makes a bigger difference starting out than it does after 40 years.
Okay. Let's keep this moving. I have a diet to attend in Worms tomorrow, and I want to get a good night's sleep so I can argue with those dogmatic papists, and into the ground they go.
Most of step 3 is just listing and adding up all the information you've entered so far. However, box N is now where you indicate whether or not your congregation provides a parsonage.
Oh, thank God there's no parsonage here. In Erfurt, I had to live in the cloister. Do you know those guys I had to live with only bathed twice a year?
Lovely. Now that I've entered that, it gives me a range of salaries.
That is perfect. It gives us numbers we shall call the small compensation and the large compensation. This is most certainly true.
Yeah, we're calling it the recommended compensation range. It provides a range to help you decide what you'd like to pay your rostered leader. Based on your context and your leader, you may choose to stick in the middle of the median or offer more or less. Finding the right number in that range should involve conversation with your rostered leader.
Yeah, like how we teach children at the dinner table about the Lord's Prayer, Creed, and the 10 Commandments. Conversation is important.
It is extremely important. Once you have come to a number you agree on, enter it in box P on step 4.
How about wage?
What do you think?
I'm thinking the range of 0. Yep. Got it. That's it, right? Are we done?
If you're calling a deacon, you are done. However, if you're calling a pastor, you have to pay attention to the numbers calculated below. Congregations don't withhold Social Security from pastors' paychecks, so they don't automatically contribute the additional 7.65% a non-church employer would pay toward an employee's Social Security. It's only fair to congregations to, therefore, pay that the pastor as an additional compensation.
It's only fair, assuming Pope Leo doesn't have me killed before I can take my Social Security. That guy really doesn't like me.
That is fair.
And thus you come to the defined compensation in amount R. Once we're all done, you can print the form, sign, and date it to have a record.
What's this step 5?
That's for determining your housing allowance or furnishing allowance. Pastors don't have to pay federal income tax on a housing allowance that is used for housing-related expenses.
Wait, what? I don't have to pay taxes?
Oh boy.
It's complicated, but you can have it part of your compensation designated as a housing or furnishing allowance. That's more information on determining the amount you want to elect in Section 1, Part B of the Senate Guidelines. When you determine that amount, enter it in the form.
Are you sure this is legal? I went to law school briefly with a few IRS auditors. They can be tough. Will this stand up to scrutiny?
That's what the last section is for. Have your council pass a resolution using that model, and it will be sufficient for an audit.
Wunderbar!
So that's it?
That's it. You're done. unless you want to talk about additional non-monetary compensation you might provide.
Oh, you mean like relics or indulgences or...
9! No.
Congratulations, you made it through the worksheet. You're not done yet, though. In addition to the worksheet, there is a whole packet that comes with the compensation guidelines, and this packet is very important, especially this year. When we began work on the 2021 guidelines, we knew that our synod was the lowest of those in our area with regard to baseline compensation. And synod staff had told us that we had lost good candidates for ministry in the Central States Synod because our guidelines were low. So one of the changes that we made was increasing the baseline compensation so that it is on par with those other synods. And then came the pandemic. So we know that some congregations will have trouble striving to lift up the compensation to the level of 2021. That's where this comes in really handy, and that conversation is very necessary. I invite you to look at Section 4 of these guidelines. In Section 4 are some alternatives to regular financial compensation. For example, would your rostered minister appreciate extra time in vacation or continuing education? And then there's an opportunity for each congregation or ministry site to look at the unique gifts that are available in its members. Are there people who would do yard work or offer daycare or hair care or other services to the rostered minister? These all can be part of compensation, but be sure to do that in conversation with the rostered minister. Do not offer them things that they do not want or need as part of compensation. That's a lot to take in. If you need help with compensation, with the conversations between elected leaders and rostered ministers, or any specific questions, please let us know. This is a big change in compensation, and we are excited about it. But we also know that this year was not what any of us expected. Blessings to you and the ministry that we share.